There are stories that begin with a crime, and there are stories that begin with a mistake. One so deep, so devastating, that it steals an entire lifetime. Ricky Jackson's story is one of those. A man who spent nearly 4 decades behind bars for a murder he did not commit. A crime built on a lie from a scared 12-year-old boy. But what makes this story even more haunting isn't just the injustice, it's what came after the truth surfaced. Because when freedom finally came knocking, Ricky had already written what he thought would be his final note to the world. This is the final note of a death row inmate, the Ricky Jackson confession twist.
Late last year, Ricky Jackson walked out of prison. He spent 39 years there.
39 years, 3 months, and 8 days. That's how long 2 Ohio men spend in prison for a crime they did not commit.
Well, a Cleveland man will soon be free from prison 39 years after he was falsely accused of murder.
It was a warm afternoon in Cleveland, Ohio, May 19, 1975. A local money order salesman, Harold Franks, was gunned down outside a corner store. He was carrying receipts, cash, and a briefcase, the kind of thing that could tempt the wrong kind of attention. Moments later, the gunman sped away in a green car. Within hours, police were swarming the neighborhood. They wanted justice fast. They searched for the culprit, eyewitnesses, and evidence. The city was tense, racial lines were sharp, and the police department needed to show control. But in their rush, they looked past evidence and toward an eyewitness. A 12-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon. Eddie started to narrate the story to the detectives that he saw 3 men, Ricky Jackson and brothers, Wiley and Ronnie Bridgman, attack Harold Franks. He described their faces. He said he saw the gun. He even claimed to have seen the victim fall. He explained everything happened without missing any single detail. There was only one problem. He didn't see any of it. In truth, Eddie had only heard rumors from people on the street. No physical evidence, no fingerprints, no weapon, just the testimony of a frightened 12-year-old boy. When the verdict came down, Ricky Jackson stood silent. He was 18 years old. The words echoed, sentenced to death. And as the gavel hit, his world went dark. Ricky's new home was death row. Concrete walls, steel bars, and the suffocating knowledge that each sunrise could be his last. Longing for his own death, he was assigned a cell barely big enough to stretch in. No family nearby, no hope of parole, just time, endless, punishing time. But something inside him refused to die. Ricky began reading law books, poetry, history. He started writing letters. To lawyers, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. Most never replied. Some letters came back unopened, yet every word he wrote carried a heartbeat of hope. Because deep down, Ricky believed that the truth had a strange way of surviving, even when buried alive. In 1978, the Ohio Supreme Court struck down the state's death penalty laws. For Ricky, that meant one thing. He wouldn't die by the state's hand, but his sentence wasn't erased. It was merely converted to life imprisonment. So instead of dying quickly, he would now live slowly, trapped behind bars, watching decades turn like pages in a book he never wanted to read. Still, he adapted. He worked in the prison kitchen, read philosophy, mentored younger inmates. Ricky Jackson, the boy who had been condemned, became a man others looked up to. But the question that haunted him most wasn't about justice. It was, will the truth ever find me? Meanwhile, Eddie Vernon, the boy whose testimony had sealed Ricky's fate, grew into a man. But that childhood lie, it followed him. It clung to his conscience, whispering during sleepless nights. He'd tried to move on, but every time he looked in the mirror, he saw 3 men who didn't belong in prison. He told a few people over the years, a pastor, a friend, even his wife, but no one knew how to undo a lie written in the ink of the justice system. Eddie carried that secret for nearly 40 years, until one day he couldn't anymore. In 2011, Eddie Vernon, now in his 50s, fell gravely ill. Lying in a hospital bed, he told his pastor, Reverend Mark Giuliano, that he had lied in 1975. He said, "Those men didn't do it. "I didn't see anything, I just said what they wanted to hear." His pastor listened, stunned. And when Eddie recovered, he did something brave. He put it in writing. With the help of the Ohio Innocence Project, Eddie signed an affidavit recanting his entire testimony. He stood before the court and told the truth, the one he'd buried for decades. The courtroom fell silent. Even Ricky, now a gray-haired man sitting quietly in shackles, couldn't believe it. After all those years, the truth had finally spoken. The court began re-examining the case. Every detail, every witness, every line of testimony. There had never been any physical evidence tying Ricky or the Bridgman brothers to the murder. Everything had rested on Eddie's false memory. In November 2014, the truth finally triumphed. The charges were dismissed. After 39 years, Ricky Jackson was free. He walked out of prison into a world that had changed beyond recognition. Smartphones, the internet, self-driving cars, things he'd only read about in old newspapers. As cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward him, he smiled softly and said, "I don't hate anybody. I just want to live." Before his release, Ricky had written what he believed would be his final note, a goodbye to a world that would never see him as innocent. In that letter, he thanked the few people who'd written to him, spoke about forgiveness, and said he hoped that somewhere beyond those walls, his story would matter. He never thought the world would actually get to read it, but when the truth emerged, that note became something else, a symbol of resilience. It wasn't a man's last words before death, it was a man's message to life itself. Even when the truth is silent, it's still alive. Ricky's case became the longest wrongful imprisonment in U.S. history to end in exoneration. He received compensation from the state, but no amount could reclaim 39 lost years. He once said in an interview, "You can't give me back my mother's voice. You can't give me back youth or freedom. But you can give me a chance to start again." He spent his freedom quietly, advocating for reform, speaking at law schools, and visiting prisons to tell inmates not to give up hope. Years later, Eddie Vernon and Ricky Jackson met. No drama, no shouting, just two men connected by pain and redemption. Eddie broke down, saying, "I'm sorry, I destroyed your life." And Ricky, the man who had every reason to hate, said softly, "It's okay, you gave it back." That single exchange said everything about forgiveness, not as an act of mercy, but as an act of survival. Ricky's story didn't end with freedom. It became a mirror held up to the justice system, showing how fragile truth can be when weighed against fear, bias, and haste. His case has been studied in law schools, featured in documentaries, and retold in podcasts. But what lingers most is the emotion, the raw humanity behind every scene. A teenager wrongly condemned, a child forced to lie, and a system too eager to believe what fit the narrative. Now an older man, Ricky spends his days quietly in Cleveland. He gardens, reads, and writes about the world he finally got back. He once told a journalist, "I don't live with anger, I live with gratitude, because anger would have kept me in prison even after I got out." Those words, calm, reflective, and haunting, tell us something bigger than the case itself. They remind us that even in the darkest corners of injustice, the human spirit can find its way back to light. The story of Ricky Jackson isn't just about one man's freedom. It's about a system built on imperfection, a lie that turned into a life sentence, and the rare miracle of truth catching up, even if it took 39 years. In the end, Ricky's final note wasn't his goodbye. It was a quiet message to all of us. That truth delayed is still truth. That forgiveness is strength. And that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about vengeance or victory, but about the long, painful journey back to being seen. If this story made you stop, think, or feel something deeper, stay with us for more real stories that reveal the faces behind justice, the truth, and the people forever changed by it. Because somewhere out there, another story like Ricky's is still waiting to be heard.